And welcome to Art with Alexander. It's not exactly a real sunny day, but hopefully this is still a good day for painting. Let's try it. I've got about 4 little scrappings of paper, things that I usually don't do a whole lot with, and I just had a few ideas that I said, you know what? Let's do some demos. And while I'm at it, I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between some of your cheaper products and some of your more expensive products, mostly paint, because I like to do watercolors, even though I am going to do a little inking today. At least that's the plan. And I learned something interesting about ink pens, which I will share when I get to the ink pen. But for now, the differences between your cheap and your expensive art supplies. And I don't know about everybody's area, but getting good art supplies in my area is not an easy thing to do. Just so you know what I'm doing, I've got a circle here. You can draw a circle any way you like. You can do it with a regular pencil. I happen to like watercolor pencils because they'll disappear when wet, or depending on how heavy you used it, they will bleed into your picture and add more color to it. But I like them because I can make them disappear when I paint. Anyway, back to supplies. When it comes to a lot of the local supplies, I think of them as either child grade or student grade. They don't sell any professional paints in my town. I have to go to other towns, or I have to order them online somewhere. In fact, I end up ordering quite a bit of things online because sadly we don't have an art supply store here. And the closest ones are about 45 minutes drive away. So I've got the circle wet. And I'm going to use a Cascade Green, which is done by Daniel Smith. It's Daniel Smith, isn't it? Yes, Daniel Smith. This is a 2-colored watercolor. And you can get things, you can make your own greens, you can buy other things, and you can do what I'm about to do with this with any paint you felt like doing, because this is mostly for fun. Just going to go around the edge of this so that I can complete the circle and let it bleed in. This is cotton paper. Cotton paper is recommended by the majority of professional grade artists because of a number of properties, one being its retention of water. It does hold water very well. And most of what I can get in town, in fact everything I can get in town, is called pulp paper. Pulp paper is just regular tree paper. And why people prefer the watercolor over this paper is pretty simple and obvious if you actually have them to compare, which, since you can't buy it locally, you can't compare it in my town very easily. But if you do go somewhere else or order it in, cotton paper works kind of like a sponge to varying degrees. It holds the water, it allows your paint to soak in like the sponge, and kind of feathers its way in. There, I have a circle. You're wondering what I'm doing with the circle. Well, fortunately for you, I have already prepared another circle that I'm going to do things with next. And what I'm doing is, I think it's called water painting. You paint the water on and then you put the paint in the water and you let it do its thing. Now, the cheaper paper, the water just sits there on top. You can move it around, but it doesn't soak in, it doesn't bleed, because if I lift this up here, you can see that edge, the way it's kind of bled into that wet circle that was there. And now, without a pencil or anything like that, because I'm just going to make a small background, and I could put a background like right in the center. Believe it or not, that won't look very good. One of your best things to do is to have it either high up or low down, like a third. So I'm going to, on top of what I've got here, putting in some water, because I want to do the same thing I did with the circle with a background, or not background, but like the ground, where the ground's going. You'll notice when I get that paint that's there already wet, it gets dark again. But don't worry about that. Unless you're sitting there just scrubbing away at it, which you can do. That's something you can do if you want to remove something you got there already. And I'm in the mood for mushrooms. I like mushrooms. They're easy. They're like roses. Roses can be easy, but I just happen to like mushrooms. So let's get some water on here. Get us a stem. Maybe get us a second little mushroom. And maybe just the ball of a small mushroom coming up. Just give it a little water right there. The color I'm using for this is, I believe, also Daniel Smith. Yes, this is also Daniel Smith. This is a rose magenta, rose cobalt, I think. It's also a duo color. And the duo color means there's two colors in the paint. And when they separate, you end up with that bled color. And I'm going to pull it down just a bit since this is the ground. We want the ground to be grounded. Haha, see what I did there? Ground is grounded. So you'll notice I'm using a lot of Daniel Smith. I'm not terribly prejudiced between the more expensive paints. I'm not a big fan of Cinnabar just because the honey base is a bit sticky for my preferences. No other reason. If you like Cinnabar, knock yourself out. But one of the differences between these and, say, Crayola or Prang is that sometimes they're a little hard. The color Crayolas and Prangs, they might re-wet all right. The colors are usually fairly vibrant, but there are two big things about them that will put off most of the artists who claim to be doing things professionally. Namely, how long will they last before they fade? Because if you're selling something, you don't want it to disappear in a week when you've sold it to somebody. That might not do very good for your reputation. The other reason is pigments. The pigments involved in professional watercolors tend to be highly concentrated, and therefore, unlike, say, Crayola, where you give your pan of Crayolas to somebody and you can use it up in one picture really easily, trying to get a bright, vibrant picture, you use these, you'll notice that I've got a big old pan here. I'm just getting a little bit on my brush, and it spreads quite a ways. You see how it does that? That's just a little teeny tiny dip. And we are doing quite a bit with just a little teeny tiny dip here. It goes in and it spreads a long ways. And it comes on up here. And look at that. We've got, in no time at all, a little mushroom. And you can hardly even tell I've used paint, because I have hardly ever have hardly used the paints at all. And we've made a cute, quick, little fun mushroom picture there. Just a few moments. It's not big, it's not fancy, it's not horribly detailed, and I didn't even bother taping it down, you'll see. This isn't really a problem. If I take this, once it's fully dried, give it a couple of days, I can take this, flip this over on an ironing board, give it a light spritz of water, and use an iron to flatten this little piece out. No problem. And for now, we will set that aside. The next thing I have may take a couple of swipes, and even though it was already prepped, my beef with washi tape. I watch other artists with washi tape and it sticks on there, and they complain about it sticking on there to the point where they talk about how they have to stick it to their legs to get it off. Maybe somebody's got a washi tape that's better. If somebody knows a washi tape that's better, please let me know about it. Usually what I like is something you'll see on the next little peach I've got set up that holds on so much better. It works so much better. But I'm trying to use this stuff up because once upon a time I bought it, and I don't like wasting things. I really don't like wasting things. So what am I doing with this? This is going to be almost on the line with the mushrooms before, but I'm only going to wet the very top of this first. The very, very top of this, and you'll see why in a minute. Because when watercolor comes into contact with paper that's already wet, it tends to bleed out. And what I want to do, I want to just suggest a little bit of sky to this. I didn't really prepare a color for it. And I'm going to use a cheaper color by Arteza. And by the way, anybody questioning, I'm not sponsored by anybody. This is just me, my opinions, from experience with the things I've worked with. That's all this is. It's just me using stuff. And some of my problems I'm having with this paper is, I've been having a problem with this paper from the beginning, and this is one of those cheap product problems. And the thing is, this was not cheap paper. This is 300-pound cotton watercolor paper by Canson. 100% cotton, nice thick, supposedly good watercolor paper. However, I bought it on a clearance. And probably that should have told me something, but I'm betting this paper has either been handled a lot, exposed to floor cleaners in the stores, because it was just a hobby shop and they just keep all this paper on a rack in the open air, or it could just be old, because the sizing, that's a kind of glue that holds all the fibers together in their papers, may just be old. And it does all kinds of funky things. Now this is a Winsor & Newton. This is another one of those expectedly good brands. And you see it's completely dry. This little pad is totally dry. How easy is it to reactivate a good paint? We wait for just a moment there. I dip my brush in and look at that. You can see the pigment on that. That is really, really on there. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to do some mountains. And this is a dry technique. This is dry on dry. Putting this on dry. But this brush is a squirrel hair brush. Now why is that significant? Squirrel hair holds a lot of water. This isn't exactly a quill brush, which I don't have. Maybe I do have a quill brush here somewhere, but it's a really, really big one. I don't need it for this. And they hold a lot of water. They just really do. And what I'm wanting to do is to just suggest some rolling hills. That's all I'm doing, is suggesting some rolling hills here. Just quick and easy rolling hills onto this dry paper. Let them fold over each other and flip behind each other and just work into each other. At this point I am getting quite a bit of water on here, but there is a reason for that, because every bit of water in your brush that can soak into a paper like this, which isn't my ideal paper, but hey, when it was on sale for $1 a sheet, I wasn't passing it up. And then I got home and started messing with it and realized why it was $1 a sheet. It's pretty obvious that there are places on it that don't hold the paint quite right. Getting the paint to move the way it should doesn't work quite the way I expect it to all the time. One of the first pieces I did, I tried to do a wash on it, and that's where you just take a single color and just cover the whole thing in an even layer. That was a disaster. It looked like somebody had gone and just blown something all over it, and it just wouldn't hold, like it had oil on it. And if it had floor cleaners on it, because places like that have people that come in and regularly clean and wax their floors for them overnight, yeah, that's pretty much what it's going to do. It's getting wax all over it, and wax is a resist. You can actually take just a clear wax. They sell wax crowns, or you can use a really cheap paraffin candle for the same effect, and you can just scribble a picture on there. Your paint will not stick there, period, no matter how much you want it to. And that's basically the effect that I think floor cleaner had on parts of this paper. So, despite the fact that this is supposed to be good paper, I honestly don't use this for a lot of important projects after noticing what it did. But it still is obviously cotton paper because you can see this is dry and it is just soaking up that color, even if this looks like a scribbly mess. There are people out there that do this particular technique much better than I do. And who knows, maybe if I decide to take my time with a little bit, I can go back in here. I can darken these up. This particular color is very staining. This was cobalt turquoise. No, this is just cobalt deep green. And it is a very staining color, even on pulp paper. Forget taking this stuff up. But I can go back with this. I can leave it there, or I could go and get maybe a brighter color. I've got a little bit of a liney green off to the side here. Let's say I want to add this a little bit more color to it. I can take it, add a little more color to it. Woohoo! I've also got a sap green over here. I've got a bunch of cheaper paints, and they take a little more activating. So some of these may behave themselves. See, I don't get a lot of color off this one because I literally just wet it, and I didn't get as much color off of it. But if I go over to, say, another good color, like zoazite, this is another Daniel Smith color, and just get it a little wet. Let's go to this corner. Oops, I didn't get this one. Some of the natural ones like zoazite do take a little bit longer. See, that one's not real bright. That one would probably like to sit a bit, but that's okay. Some work better than others, especially when you get into naturals, because there's another thing. You have a difference between naturals, which are often labeled as genuines, and you have hues. Now, what's the difference, you ask? It's a very good question, and a very easy question to answer. Simply put, hue usually means that it is not the original pigment used for the color. Sometimes it means that what you're seeing isn't the color it says it is at all. Sometimes it means that they have a chemical match, or at least close match, for a color that was popular, but maybe it was made with cadmium or zinc or lead or cobalt or some other heavy material. And it's not real popular right now to use those because they are, in fact, toxic if you ingest them. And people worry about them getting into the landfills and into the water system. To be honest, how much, you see how little I'm using here. And even less than that is going into your water systems. So unless you are making lots of massive pictures and going through tubes and tubes of paint and really messy and wasting a lot of paint, you are having minuscule amounts go into your watershed. I mean, way below the worried aspect of it. Some people would probably still worry, and that's fine. One thing, if you're actually worried about that sort of thing, coffee filters. Just pour your water when you're done with it through a coffee filter. And then you can throw the coffee filter away, or send it off to wherever you think it should go. Anyway, just a quick little thing, and this looks kind of blah, doesn't it? Well, good thing for us, watercolor dries, especially on good paper like this, and soaks in so that you can have a dry, solid drawing thing here. Quite simple. So what am I going to do with this? I am going to get a dip pen. You've probably seen these, or at least have some idea what a dip pen is. You take it, it's got a removable nib with a collet in it. That's the part that holds on to things that you can slide in and out. And you use it to dip it into ink and draw things. For this, I'm going to use, as soon as I shake it up just a little tiny bit because it settles really quickly, some white ink. Somebody gave me this, ignore the link, the thing on it, but it's Bombay White India ink. That's what it is. It's not really a dripper. It's got a dripper on it, but it doesn't seem to work, so I'm using it for a dip pen. I don't care. Anyway, something interesting I found out about dip pens that nobody ever bothered to tell me is that apparently these need to be prepped. And once I thought about this, I kind of did the Italian thing and slapped my forehead and said, well, of course it needs to be prepped. Because they're not going to send these out to sell and have them all rusty before they even get somewhere. They're made of metal. And they're indeed coated with metal. Of course they're coated with metal. They're coated with oil to keep them from rusting during the process of making them, and during shipping, and during storage before they're sold. Let's see. How about some dandelions? I love dandelions. And this one is not as good as the other one I have. Maybe I should have used it instead, but this is white. It's a little harder to clean off. Here we go. But anyway, you notice the white ink just goes on top of the watercolor, and you can see it pretty well. You have to hold these at an angle. The ink sits in the little slots there. And as you write, it comes off with a nice satisfying little scratchy sound. I'm not doing ASMR, forget it. And you can see somebody scratched this before I tried coloring it. Maybe I probably should have used a fatter nib for this. This is really a fine nib. It doesn't seem to work well with the white, but that's what I chose to use, and I'm not going to pull it off right now. So anyway, who knows, maybe this would have even been better with something else, because I've always been told that pens work best on vellum. And you can see there's a little bit of fiber, or maybe that's just a cat hair, coming off on this pen. Let's just do some quick little leaves if I can. It's not going to behave. Okay. Yeah, I should have tested this before I tried it. That would always be a great idea, wouldn't it? But with the regular ink, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute, on some nice, smooth, pulpy paper, although one of the ones I used was bamboo, which is super, super smooth. But yeah, just, you know, little doodle there, maybe a little quick bumblebee if I can get this to last long enough. That'd be nice, right? Bumblebee. Do a quick little bumblebee if the pen will behave for me. Just so that this isn't totally unfinished. And give him a little eyeball. It's a terrible little drawing, but that's okay. And what you would do to clean this off, you can wipe it off with a rag soaked in either odorless spirits, turpentine, fingernail polish cleaner if you really want. I like to wipe off the excess on just a paper towel. That way I'm not going through a ton of my cleaning supplies. This is just some low odor thinner. Honestly, this was, well, it was one of the first things I bought before I found out I could have just used fingernail polish remover. Which probably would have been a lot cheaper. If you want to know how much that is, you'll just go have to look it up. I'm sure that any place that sells pens probably sells this too. It's just Daler Rowney low odor thinner. I'm told that Winsor Newton has one. There are several other companies that have it. It just happens to be the one I managed to find. Anyway, I'm going to put the dip pen over here because I have another nib, but I'm just going to show you some of the others. Let's see. Let me find the book because I set it here and then I forgot where I set it. Okay. Now, a better example, this is the bamboo paper. And the first thing I got was a dip pen, and I got some Hongdian, I guess it's right, blackish green. I just liked the color, and for 10 bucks I thought, yeah, I want to try that. It's got lots of ink in it, 60 milligrams or something like that. But anyway, this was their blackish green, and I wanted to play with it in the new dip pen, and you'll see I had a hard time controlling the ink. This was before I found out about prepping the pen ink, the pen nib. And it was simple. You just take a lighter or match or whatever you prefer, and you just hold it over the flame for a couple of seconds just to burn off any oils. And after that, your pen is ready to go. In this case, of course, I didn't know that, so it wasn't prepped, so I had a hard time getting ink to go on the nib and stay there. It came off in globs and really heavy. It did lots of weird stuff. So, after I found out about that, good old trusty thick book. Oops, where's it at? It's at the back somewhere. After finding this out and prepping this thing, you'll notice that I had a lot less trouble. Yes, I make spelling mistakes. I'm a terrible speller, and I often make spelling mistakes. Sue me. But, you know, you can see that I didn't have any of the giant globs. Maybe a couple of them down here where I was getting into it a little bit more. Maybe the ink was sticking a little bit more. And then me just doing heavy work, I don't know. But I don't have any of the giant blobs that you see like this, where I basically made an extra fat O because I had so much ink come off my nib at once. And here it's much more controlled. I was able to do little bitty bits. Some of the ink would run out, no big deal. You just go back and dip some more and get more out. Not a big deal. So then you're asking, well, you're talking about the qualities and the paints. Paints, yes. Papers, yes. They do different things. And even among your I have lost my brain. Somebody bring back my brain, please. Even among things like paper, even the cotton papers, the good papers, all of them react differently. I have one that is cotton paper and extremely soft, and I do not use any kind of resist on it that I want to take off. There are things you can put on it that are basically a gum that dries onto your page and you can peel it off when you're done. I don't use it much, but it's useful sometimes. When you come to your paints, I mean, you look at these, you saw how little bit I used. Just a little teeny tiny dab on all the little things I used. And sure, a big tube like this or a small tube like this, go to the right places and it might cost you $6 or $7 for this one, maybe as much as 10 or 13 depending on the pigment used in it. This one happens to be a cadmium yellow hue, which means it doesn't have actual cadmium in it. It is a color chemically created to mimic yellow cadmium medium. That's what that is. And then you have others like these that I've seen. The most expensive one of these I've seen is Sleeping Beauty turquoise. I think I've seen that one best priced for around 25 bucks, maybe 20 if there was a sale. But there's 15 milliliters in this. There's 5 in this. And one of these I can use to fill an entire full pan. I have pans of colors from the Arteza set that are all half pans. So basically half of one of these tubes. I've been using them for years at this point. So yes, it's expensive. Those sets can be really, really expensive. But unless you are making giant 6-foot drippy paintings, this will last you forever. And the nice thing about watercolors is, yeah, they might dry up in the pan. I've got a couple here that are probably dried in these pans, or mostly dried, that someone gave me. They don't even have a brand on them that I can tell, so I couldn't tell you what their quality is meant to be. And I'll use them for practice mostly, or maybe when I have the kids over and we're doing learning practices, you know, things like that. And what I will do is I will crack this off, carefully peel off this outer shell, because this is just really soft, flexible metal. I don't know what the actual metal is. I don't think it's lead. It could be aluminum. It could be anything. I have no idea. I've never looked that up. But this just, you bend it back and forth, it cracks off. You use a pair of pliers, you can pull it off, and the inside will give you stuff like this or that. You know, these have obviously been used for things. Some of them surprised me and turned out to actually have liquid things in them. And as one of my kids says, it looks like spaghetti. Well, I get it wet enough and swish it around, it won't. But this becomes a dry pan instead of tubes. And you re-wet it. Maybe you'll be a little patient with it and you'll have to give it some time. Maybe it'll be like this one and you'll get the little grainy bits that come off in your painting. Maybe you'll like that. Incorporate it into your paintings. That's one of the things about watercolors, that it's not always predictable. And sometimes these, as one oil painter used to put it, happy little accidents can add some real texture and flavor to your paintings. So see, like this is going to be wet for a while. You'll notice it's bowed up a little bit. I could probably put some more colors up here, probably. Maybe a little bit of yellow, give it a little sunset. Grab a little brush, grab a little water, grab a little paint, because some of these I think might have been better paints, and they're already slightly wet because I used them down there. But let's add in a sunrise. We'll make that sunrise. And I put that on dry, but I'm going back with water. And notice what it does now. It continues to pull up that color from that dryness and pull it up into that little bit of blue in the top. See that? That is one of the joyful things that you can do with watercolor. Watercolor's a real pushover like that sometimes, because you can push watercolor around, and sure, sometimes it gets a backbone and it tries to stand up and it does things you didn't expect. Like if I left this dry over here, I'd get what they call a hard edge, which is what I want from the mountains. Not so much from the sky. So I'm going to get that wet and make it blend itself together. But there, it's a happy little sunrise. Maybe I could go back in with that white ink and a better nib and maybe put in some white fluffy sheep. I don't know. Just, or little dots of another color. I could go in with anything, really. I could go back on top of this with pastels. Oil pastels. I could go back on top of this with crayons, with colored pencils, with another color of ink. I can go back on top of this with more watercolor if I just want a really thick dot of watercolor on here somewhere. The possibilities are endless once you have dyed the page, because that's what you're doing with watercolor. It's not like oil or acrylics where you are putting on these thick layers and they have their own textures, they have their own I was going to say viscosity, but that's for water. Their own thing. They have their own properties. There we go. Their own properties. Some of them are rougher, some of them are smoother, some of them are really spongy. Like the Fluid 100 cotton paper is probably the spongiest paper I have ever worked with. It is, if you've ever seen what they call the European dish towels, and they're basically a really thin sponge, little cloth-like sponge, that's what that's like working with. It is almost as bad as that Tibetan paper that I have that I played with earlier. And then you'll have papers that are smooth and they take ink really well, and watercolor just kind of sits on top of them. And if you get those wet, your paint probably will what they call lift. Once it gets wet, you can just take it and you can take the corner of a paper towel or a rag if you prefer a rag, and you can just dab it on there or wipe it up and it'll come right off. This, nah, I get this wet, that ain't going nowhere. It might smudge a bit. I might end up with a watermark. And that's, or cauliflowering is what some people like to call it, where you drop it on there and it blooms and pushes the paint around and you get these interesting textures. Like I could have taken this, if I had thrown salt on this when it was still really wet, I'd have gotten a texture from that because the salt would pull that paint towards it or push it away, depending on how wet the salt was and how wet the watercolor around it is. One of those fun things to drop things into wet paint and see what it does. Some people don't like it, some people do. But yeah, and you could do this with cheaper paint, but I'll tell you, it would have taken longer because you would have to sit there and add layer after layer after layer, probably a couple more layers, and it may or may not have ever made you happy. But some people really like cheaper things. I know there's an artist that really likes using Crayola crayons for their artwork, and it's really neat stuff. I think it's abstract work, but just they have to lay it on thick, and you can see it. You can see the smears, you can see the texture coming off the page, and that's what they're after. They're after that texture, they're after that thick feeling. Watercolor is usually a bit more delicate. Ooh, that's neat. Just showing this part right here, it almost looks like there's pink, and I didn't add any pink. Isn't that cool? But anyway, those are the joys of just quick little things. Quick little projects that we can just do quickly. I've said that a lot. And you can do this quickly with very few actual paints that will last you a long, 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 long time. And they'll last even longer on your walls, because the other joy of having a good watercolor is that they are usually more light fast and can handle a little bit more light. Now I could also take this, and they have a product called cold wax, and I could rub cold wax into this. I could buff it out and make it shiny, and it would last even longer. I don't generally do that. Most of my things are meant for not very bright hallways and things of that nature. They're just little things. Like this, I might turn over and I might just say, "Wish you were here" to somebody. Send it as a postcard. Or somebody could put it in a frame on their desk and just, "Oh, I wish that was what my view from my desk looked like." You know, whatever. You can add these to the front of a book if you're into bookbinding. You know, just anything you want to do with a small picture. And it's made possible very quickly with better paints and good paper. I mean, we've seen this, and we can see this one is still kind of wet. It's pretty bubbly, but yeah, that's kind of neat, isn't it? And you can see the way the colors have started separating. This is that duo color. Some people call it granulating color, and you can kind of see it granulates a bit. But it looks like there's two colors in there. And that first circle we started with is not quite dry. How do I tell it's dry? It's still kind of damp feeling. It's a little bit cool compared to the paper around it. It's still pretty bowed up. It may stay that way, but you know, like I said, I can spritz the back of it, iron it carefully. Don't want to burn it. Unless you really want to burn it, and I've seen people burn the edges of their paintings. It's something people do sometimes. But anyway, that was my little video today. I hope some of it was helpful and informative, or at least entertaining. Especially since this day isn't a bright sunny day. But hey, it's only early spring. Summer's coming. And yeah, I say summer. Well, you know, I live in a place where there's no spring. It goes from winter to summer, and we might have fall spring. We had that last week. So summer's coming. Anyway, this is Art with Alexander signing out and hoping that you all have a